Howdy, it's Jim Murato. Late January 2021, and we're near Mammoth Cave, only a couple miles from the visitor center, and that is the tombstone of the legendary Floyd Collins. Yeah, I videotaped a little bit of this the other day on a recent trip to Mammoth Cave, and then I found some old video I taped from 2014. We did the Sand Cave Floyd Collins Caravan trip at Mammoth Cave. It was a free tour that they were offering, and I think they've offered it since. I don't think they're offering it now with COVID and all that good stuff going on. But I found some of that footage. I didn't tape the entire caravan trip. I mostly just got our great ranger doing a discussion. He was great. And then my camera battery went dead. So I don't have the complete tour, but I do have quite a bit of him doing a little talk about Floyd Collins. And Floyd Collins is just a legend when it comes to caving. Anyway, yeah, we're here just real quick off of a historic marker at this church, Community Cornerstone. For 200 years, Flint Ridge bustled with community life. Its residents taught school, operated show caves, and farmed the rugged hillsides to provide for their families, and the cornerstone of this community was the church. Faithful members often walked or rode horseback through wind, rain, mud to attend worship, homecomings, and revivals. It provided a refuge for neighbors to rest from their labor, a joyous gathering place for weddings, a sanctuary for funeral mourners. With the development of Mammoth Cave National Park, hundreds of families sold, willingly or unwillingly, the only home they had ever known. Home sites were dismantled and reclaimed by forests, erasing fields that once ensured the survival of generations. Though communities moved away, some family members stayed behind, at rest in this church's cemetery and in hundreds of graves shrouded in these woods. The Mammoth Cave Baptist Church is one of the few pre-park structures still standing in the park. Its presence recalls the congregations it once nurtured, the lives they lived, and the sacrifice they made so that all may enjoy this earthly piece of heaven. And I just think that's really nice. Anyway, our ranger's about to start talking, so I'm going to let him take over.
Guide today, taking you along the route today, and it's going to be about a 2-hour caravan, and this is really the only program that we do like this, where we meet and we actually travel from stop to stop on different locations that were significant in the life of Floyd Collins. And is anybody familiar? You guys familiar with Floyd Collins, his story at all? So you folks are?
Yeah, we just heard a little bit this morning.
Okay, so just got a little bit this morning, so kind of the gist of it you probably know. And then today we'll just kind of get into more detail of that and kind of unravel a lot of the, his early days, what led him here, why was he here, why was he exploring, and ultimately what happened to him, and then what happened to him even after he had passed on. We're going to be going about 2 hours today, and that's from time here to the time we're concluded to be approximately 2 hours. And we're going to drive from here a few miles down the Park Ridge Road and then onto the Flint Ridge Road. We'll actually be traveling to the home place of Floyd Collins, kind of where he grew up and his family lived and they farmed. And that is the only structure in the park, the only pre-park home that is still standing here. So we'll leave there, and we'll eventually travel to the Mammoth Cave Church today, where Floyd Collins is resting in his final place. So that's what we're going to be doing as we caravan. Could become some little narrow one-lane roads and things of that sort. Shouldn't have any problems. We'll go nice and slow. So what are we here for? And this is about Floyd Collins, and really, I guess I can identify with him, and we probably all can. Have you ever just had a dream, just something you wanted to achieve? I'm sure we all have. And sometimes people will spend their entire lives chasing their dreams. Some people will achieve those dreams, and some will not. Floyd Collins had a dream, and that dream was to own and operate a commercial cave. That's what he wanted. He grew up in this area. He had saw Mammoth Cave. He knew they were here. They were doing big business. If you folks like, you can feel free to come on through or stay with us. Or they could, so they were doing big business. He had saw other caves in the area like Colossal Cave and Great Onyx Cave and just numerous other caves here. Living here in this South Central Kentucky and this kind of ridge and valley land, a lot of times it was just rough. You had a lot of times poor soils up here on the ridge tops, uneven ground. The soils are relatively thin in most places, and again, it was just hard living. And Floyd's passion really wasn't into that. It was caves from the time he was small and up. Probably one thing that really lit the fire under him was just up this road here. There's a road you guys may have passed called the Frozen Niagara Road. And if you take the Domes and Dripstones tour, or if you take the Frozen Niagara tour, you guys go down that road. And that'll take you to a place called the New Entrance to Mammoth Cave. And the New Entrance to Mammoth Cave was really the achievement of what seemed impossible. And what that was is Mammoth Cave was the primary cave tour destination for people who were coming to this part of Kentucky. And if you were coming here, odds are you were going to Mammoth Cave. There are hundreds of caves here. There's over 300 caves in this park that don't even connect to Mammoth Cave. And back before it was a park, this was all privately owned property. So there were hundreds of families who lived here, again, farms, and a lot of those places had caves. Some of them were successful and were able to open up. None of them could really capitalize and be as successful as Mammoth Cave was. And that was the big dream. People were just chasing after this white whale all the time. And a guy from Ohio named George Morrison came down here, and all these other landowners or people pursuing the cave business, they kind of started outside and wanted to work their way in. And George did it the opposite. He went in Mammoth Cave on a tour, and with a little bribery of a guide, he got a key to the front door to Mammoth Cave and started to explore from the inside of the cave out beyond the property lines of the privately owned property. So within a few years, he discovered a big secret that the Mammoth Cave estate didn't want anybody to know. And that is that big cave over there is not entirely owned by them. It went out from under their property. So George began to buy land that was adjacent to it. He bought cave rights from people, and he blasted into a sinkhole and discovered a part of Mammoth Cave that he owned and operated, called his place the New Entrance to Mammoth Cave. So if you've never been here before, you're driving down the road, you're wanting to go to Mammoth Cave, if you see a sign that says New Entrance to Mammoth Cave, that's the way to go. This is where I need to go. So he was successful, extremely successful, in siphoning off a lot of traffic. And that was in about 1921. And so Floyd saw that this dream that he had wanted, and many others in the area, could be achievable. And one thing George had was that the main traffic that's coming in would get to George's Cave before you'd get all the way over to where the historic entrance, where the visitor center is today. George had good location, the key to his business. So Floyd Collins, in 1925, came here, and this property used to be owned by a man named B. Doyle. And B. Doyle has got a cave that we're getting ready to walk to here in just a second. And this cave had the potential to go somewhere. Nobody had really been in it. And Floyd was determined to explore this cave. So he stayed with B. Doyle, and in the morning in 1925, in the month of January, he got up and he traveled the path chasing his dream that would take him into Sand Cave. So that's why this area for Floyd, again, is so significant. It was a place that was closer, again, to the incoming traffic than even George's Cave, and it held the hopes of him achieving what he had always wanted to do, succeeding and finding a great big commercial cave close to the road and be successful. If at any point on the route today as we hike and walk, and feel free to ask any questions, and I'll be Did you do that on your first time?
Yeah, my first time. That was your first time?
The first time you played racquetball. The first time you ever played, did you have a perfect game? No. Pretty good. Yeah. I think you practiced a lot, didn't you? Yeah. So a lot of times you have to do that. Just keep practicing, keep chasing it. Sometimes until you have that perfect game. And this is where, in the end of January in 1925, Floyd Collins went in to explore. And he was gone for several hours, and nobody really thought much of it. That's the kind of explorer that Floyd was. Sometimes he'd be gone, sometimes for days at a time. The next morning at B. Doyle's house, Floyd had not come back yet. And they did have some concern, so they walked down here to the entrance and noticed his jacket was hanging here. And they soon discovered that Floyd was in the cave, but on his way coming out, he had dislodged about a 27-pound rock. Not very big, but it fell and it wedged and pinned his ankle. And the passage that he was in was extremely tight and confining. So when he couldn't bend down to remove the rock, he couldn't physically touch the rock with his hands, and tried to kick it off, but unfortunately when it did that, brought down some more rubble around him, tinier boulders and cobbles and things of that sort, kind of almost concreting him in to this passageway, kind of like a big rock straitjacket, if you will. So there was no way that he could free himself. A rescue effort, local, soon was involved, and among these were Floyd's brother, Homer, and Marshall Collins. They were here, and Homer made different trips in and out of the cave trying to free Floyd, and they tried everything they thought possible. They tried to dig, they tried to reach around, they tried to poke and gouge around him to try to get this rock out of the way, and it just was not going to move. And so, as they were there, they realized that this was going to be a much bigger job than they had thought. This is Floyd Collins himself. So if you haven't seen him, this is the man who was here. He was 37 years old. Again, had been caving his entire life. Renowned as one of, if not the best caver in this part of the country. Just extraordinary in the places that he had went and the things that he had achieved. And what I have here is a little diagram. We can see where they would go in here to the shelter of the cave. So this is more like a rock shelter, but in here there is a hole that descends down. And if you go down that hole, that's as Floyd did, he eventually got down here to the part where he got lodged on his way out. So you can kind of see where he was, not too far from the entrance. And Floyd Collins basically was trapped at this point. So this became a more widespread thing. So not only was it locally, people in surrounding counties started to come over, tried to help as best they could. It got to be such a big deal that the National Guard was actually called in for crowd control, because this soon kind of gave way from people just showing up to help to a bunch of onlookers coming to see and be part of the plight of this man. And while it was here, there was one day, and we just passed a sign back there that referred to this as Carnival Sunday. And the reason it was called Carnival Sunday is because there were nearly, if you can imagine, I know it looks peaceful, quiet, and serene here today, 10,000 people here. 10,000 people. That's bigger than the hometown that I grew up in. And I mean, if you can imagine that, 10,000 people in this area milling around. They had hamburger stands set up. They were selling hamburgers for a nickel a piece. There's a nice picture here. You can see that? See all the people that were here. It says hamburgers 5 cents. That was going on. Wow. There were locals here selling their fresh corn squeezins, which completely prohibited and illegal to do. So that's why they call it Carnival Sunday. It was like some big crazy festival up here. And so again, the National Guard was called in for control. So where we saw that sign back there that said Carnival Sunday, that's about as close as onlookers could get. They didn't want them any closer because then they were just hindering this entire effect. So this operation went on, and it was pretty soon to realize they could not get Floyd out of the cave. So they had to go to Plan B. There were no good means they had to do it. So they said, what we're going to do is we're going to construct a shaft to get down here to Floyd Collins. If we can get this shaft created, then we should be in a good position to get in behind him and remove this rock. To complicate the matters, again, it was January. So it was cold. You might think the caves are the same temperature all the time, and that's pretty true. It is. It's about 54 degrees in Mammoth Cave all the time, unless you're around the entrance. And then around the entrance, that cold, heavy air outside sinks, and those entrances start sucking in all this cold air. So cold air sinks, and it can come into the cave, so it gets sometimes quite a bit colder in a cave entrance. So Floyd was in a cave, trapped in the winter, damp with water dripping in on him for several days without his jacket. Exactly.
See, we tell you kids all the time.
That's right. So they had run a light bulb down there to try to keep him warm. People were trying and attempting to take food in and out. Unfortunately, a lot of this didn't make it. Yeah, I dropped it off. But to get to Floyd was rather precarious. One man was already trapped. A lot of others maybe didn't want to risk their life to do that. There was one guy who was going to risk his life because he wanted the story, and that is this gentleman. Notice how thin he is and small. This is a guy named Skeets Miller, and he was a journalist for the Courier-Journal, and he was here doing the story on Floyd Collins, and eventually won the Pulitzer for such. So this guy was here, and he was making repeated trips in and out, but again, the big thing that occurred here was a collapse blocked all access to get to Floyd Collins. So now Floyd is trapped in the cave in the winter with this dripping water, a light bulb to keep warm, and now no way for anybody to get to him. And now it's just a waiting game at this point. We got to construct this shaft, and we got to get it down to him. That was going to take quite a time to do. So it became a big event. Here's some folks that are being lowered down into the shaft here. You can kind of see they're just covered with mud, with grime. They look completely exhausted from all of this work that they're doing in trying to construct this shaft through the solid rock. We have an elaborate track system that's bringing carts to and from so they can remove material from the cave, get it back, and get it out of the way. So this is like a full-scale operation. This becomes big news because it starts getting printed in newspapers. It gets put out on the radio. It's one of the biggest stories nationwide in 1925. People are sitting next to their radios. They're listening for the updates on what is happening to this poor man trapped in the sand cave of Kentucky. And here's this one from Hamilton, Ohio. Man pinned under rock in cave 84 hours. And you can continue to keep going. And we start seeing things like shaft to end in few feet of Collins. So he went in on about January the 30th. Now this is February the 8th. So he's been in for about a week and a half at this point. The shaft finally does reach Floyd Collins, and they finally make their way to him, but they realize once they got there, Floyd has died due to exposure in this cave system. This kind of ends the story. It puts papers out here. Collins found in cave, dead. And they talk about, the primary reasons that this was gone and the shaft and how nothing worked. And so it was pretty heart-wrenching for everybody who was involved, who had labored, certainly for his brothers. And there is a kind of an iconic picture of Floyd's dad and his stepmother, as you can see them here, kind of as they were waiting to see what would happen to Floyd. And those of us who have children can imagine what these folks were enduring for 2.5 weeks. So Floyd ultimately passed away here in Sand Cave in pursuit of his dream, and that was trying to find this big cave to break through. So it was something he was willing to risk his life for, and had on several occasions we'll talk more about later on. So you may wonder, well, what happened to Floyd? What happened to him is the family decided they would probably just leave Floyd here. He was caving, he was exploring, this is what he was doing, what he loved. We'll just leave him here. So they actually had a small funeral service for Floyd Collins right here at Sand Cave. This has been gated up, sealed up, and the only time people have been in here since Floyd Collins is when a book was written called Trapped by a man named Roger Brucker. And he actually went inside, found some of the remains, like some of the old electric wiring from the light bulb and things that were still inside the cave back in the 70s that were still in there. Roger has probably seen more of Mammoth Cave than any other human being on the planet. And they tell me that Roger said that he's been in there, he's not going back. So that cave is just like a death trap. You're in there, you hear these tick, 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 little bitty tiny rocks, little pebbles kind of falling around. He's like that. Not going in. So there's no access into here. And again, no further access has been in since that book was written, and is often heralded by many as the definitive story of the Floyd Collins saga that unfolded right here at this particular park. Years later, after this, eventually a book was published just in the early part of 2000, and it was an account given by Homer Collins, one of Floyd's own brothers, who was here at this site, and it is a very, very good read. You can kind of get the first-person perspective on what it was like, the frustrations he felt, things that he was having to go through himself. And both those books are available back at the Visitor Center if you want to take a peek at them, or feel free to purchase. It's up to you. But if you want to know more about that story, those are certainly excellent avenues to go through.
Wow.
So that kind of concludes this particular chapter, kind of the final chapter at least of Floyd's living time here. But we're going to take a little trip in just a moment to go back in time to kind of see where the dreams first unfolded and see where his family lived, kind of how they lived, and talk a little bit about Floyd in his early days growing up here in South Central Kentucky. Do you guys have any questions about anything? Yeah.
Hi, Joshua.
Didn't you say we're going to go into Sand Cave?
No.
No.
That doesn't sound like I'd want to.
Ever.
Yeah.
Ever. Yeah.
My question was, how many days was it before the collapse between Floyd and the people after they...
I would think it was probably, around a week or so.
A week? I just wondered, we have so many new technologies now. I just thought, because I was going to ask you at the end before you said everything, I was going to say, well, why did... That's I say it flippantly. Well, why didn't they just cut his leg off or whatever?
That's often brought up that
But
they
then-
could not get to it.
Oh, they couldn't even get to
No,
it?
he was so entombed,
Oh.
like they could not get around him to even cut his leg off.
Oh, well, I figured it just before they even had that opportunity that everything collapsed and they couldn't get to him.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was just not there was no way to get to
No
him.
way.
I mean, the way
I'm
he
sure
was.
there was some serious brainstorming going on when they're down there.
Yeah, I'd say so. They had several days to think about that, and boy, they just they got. I mean, they're kind of between a rock and a hard place for them. It's like, what do we do for this? This guy, and then, of course his brother's down there, and it's a pretty tragic
Then-
situation.
Go ahead, Cameron.
He died from exposure to what?
The elements, like it's cold, hypothermia.
Probably not much food when he got
Yeah,
cut
not
off.
much food. Yeah, malnourishment. So it was a combination. It would have been a pretty tough way to go.
You think nowadays with all the new technology they would have been able to dig?
I like
a
to
shaft?
think so. I like to think we would. I mean, some of
That's enough.
some of us are older. You remember when like Baby Jess goes in the
Right,
well?
we got
I mean,
it.
that was on the news all the time, and you heard about it, and they were able to successfully rescue her.
On the coal miners, how they get the coal miners out.
Exactly. Yeah, they were trapped underground for weeks, and
But what
was
about
out there
the
chilling.
house in Florida a couple years back, the sinkhole, where it just opened up under the guy's bedroom?
Yeah, I didn't get him.
No, and he falls down, and his brother last touches him, and he's gone.
That's it.
So the technology's great, but sometimes the Earth still wins.
Yeah, sometimes the Earth still wins. That's right. And with Chile, they had open spaces in those coal mines. They had open spaces they could go into, wait it out. They weren't physically kind of captured by the Earth itself, just cramping the squeeze on you. Plus, you can imagine if you're in there. I mean, those rocks are just going to suck the heat right out of you.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's been tough going. I would like to think that if it happened today, we could. But
And then his foot just happened to glance something?
yeah, he was
Or-
on his way out, just kind of dislodged a 27-pound rock. There is a former employee here who actually they have that rock. It had been passed down for his family for years. So, B. Doyle eventually had the rock, and in fact, they even had he had a little thing where for a quarter, basically, you could come and see the cave and see the rock that trapped it. So it was they were going to make money off this after
Right.
the fact. So Floyd wanted to have notoriety for finding the cave, but this is certainly, I'm sure, not what he wanted for himself. But it did happen in that way. So essentially exploiting his tragic end to advertise. So certainly, if you had never heard of Mammoth Cave or Floyd Collins
You did
before,
now.
you certainly did now. And because it was so pervasive in the news, business did pick up in that area.
Are we? Is there any trace of the shaft left or the tracks that they used?
There's if we were to actually go down there, there's actually like a grating that covers the hole.
Where the shaft was.
And then next to it, you can kind of see how it's all kind of got that good depression down there.
Mm-hmm. Are there actual trails down there?
There are no official trails down there. However, as you can see behind me, and as we got here, that doesn't stop people.
Yeah.
We used to have
Electric fence?
no. We used to actually have. There was a series of stairs that you could come here and walk down to the cave entrance.
Oh.
But just to keep people kind of away from that area, we've kind of got it designed in this fashion. But again, you can see behind me, there's a very, very, very well-worn trail that goes out and it goes over the top, and you can kind of see where it comes down on the other side, and you can walk down. That's no official trail. So as a park ranger, I would never encourage nor condone to use that trail. And,
Yeah, and that was John, the tour guide / ranger at Mammoth Cave, doing a great presentation on Floyd Collins. And he actually did a lot more, but again, my battery on my camera died. But I did get his main intro talk there over by Sand Cave at the exact spot, pretty much the exact spot where Floyd Collins died. One thing I don't think people get is that as Floyd Collins was crawling around that cave, think more hole in the ground. Think more really tight, scary hole in the ground. He was a tall, lanky guy who could fit in places like that. But if you're claustrophobic, this is a really scary story. Another thing we did on this caravan was we went by Floyd Collins' house, which is on the Mammoth Cave property, and they actually let us walk inside and go around and take pictures. Again, I wasn't able to videotape that, but on that when we did that guided tour back in 2014, I took pictures and just had a really good time. There was one of the caves Floyd discovered, I believe, was really close to here, and they would sell tickets. I think they had a little ticket booth. And if I remember correctly, I've also heard some rumors that Mammoth Cave has a couple of other caves, some old show caves on their property that they are restoring. And I believe one of Floyd's caves that he discovered was one of those that was going to be included. So definitely keep your eyes open for that. But yeah, I just wanted to include some pictures of the Floyd Collins house here at the end of this video, so you get to see his tombstone and where he's buried, and you also get to see where he died at Sand Cave and the home. So I hope that's everything's included. Look Floyd Collins up if you're not familiar with him, though. The story goes on too. His body was not actually buried at that site until 1989, and for a while it was even on display in one of the caves. It's a very dark, grim story. And yeah, I mean, it's one that just I can't get enough of Floyd Collins. In fact, the two books that John mentioned earlier, check those books out. Those are good books, and they really give you a good idea of the whole Floyd Collins story. And it continued on well after the 1930s. Anyway, yeah, and there's John. Wanted to give him the last shot there. There's John by Floyd Collins' tombstone. Thanks, and visit Mammoth Cave as soon as you can.